South African motorists are facing constant fuel price increases. The most recent data presents a gloomy outlook indicating that petrol prices are likely to increase by an additional 30 cents per litre in May. Diesel prices are expected to fare much better with a projected reduction of 35 cents per litre. In light of this, let's unpack savvy ways for consumers to save as much fuel as possible. For this, I'm joined by Economist Mudiwa Gavaza. Mudiwa, thank you so much for joining us this evening on News at Prime. I guess when it rains, it pours, right? More fuel price increases expected over and above the increase by over R1 so far this year. What can we expect?
Good evening, Masa. It's been, a tough one. We keep talking about this pressure that is on consumers, and that seems to be, a recurring theme. And, the expectation is that we're going to see upward pressure on the price of fuel, come the start of May. But, that's mainly for people that are using petrol, diesel. People that are filling up with diesel might have a better time at the pump. All of these estimations come from some of the data that's coming out of the Central Energy Fund. They calculate the price of fuel, every single day, and then, we get the proper regulated price increases on the first Wednesday of every month. So we'll be waiting to see what that looks like. But at the moment, that's the indication that we have, especially given some of the prevailing price increases that we've been seeing globally in the price of oil.
There are obviously global impacts as well, but when is it going to get better? I mean, the price of 95 octane petrol has increased by R2.63 per litre in Gauteng over the past 3 months alone. Or is this a case of you mentioning a little bit of reprieve for diesel? Should people be switching over from their petrol cars to diesel?
Well, that's a tough one, to call. And I say a tough one to call because that is an actual life decision that a person would have to make, switching over from petrol to diesel. And depending on who you talk to, some people actually say that the maintenance on diesel cars ends up being more expensive. I'm not a mechanic, but these are some of the, utterings that I've heard. So, it might be tempting to make that switch, but perhaps, maybe not the best decision. And also at the same time, we do have to think about the fact that, these upgrade cycles, for vehicles are not as rapid as going to buy bread. It's something that happens over time. What we may see in terms of a substitution effect, and when I say may, this one, it just depends. Consumers have been taking the brunt of these price increases, and just doing what they can to fill up the potential that exists in the market for some type of substitution is maybe thinking of a cheaper mode of transport, perhaps that switch from, let's say, your own private vehicle to some form of a, public form of transport. Perhaps you're not driving around as much, perhaps you're staying, home a bit more. If you do have a car, perhaps you are taking, shorter trips or less trips. Those are some of the substitution effects that, we would be expecting. And with everything that is going on, right now, we talk about internal factors and external factors, and for now it seems that the external factors are the main driver for what's going on in the oil price. The rand has been strengthening a little bit, which would have boded well for us. However, we do have oil price restrictions that are in place. So that supply those supply constraints have seen the price of oil, topping 90 rand a barrel and $90, a barrel. And all of that is now filtering through. And we've been seeing this with all these subsequent price increases that you made mention of just now.
Part of your tips as well, you make mention of perhaps making use of the public transport system or driving less, but taking a look at that public transport system as well. Those who perhaps use taxis, minibus taxis in particular, and buses, those costs are also going to go up as well. So you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. You're going to have to pay at some point for these increased fuel prices. And then over and above that, we don't have the most glorious public transport system either.
That's certainly true. When you look at the options that are out there, depending on which statistics, you are looking at, you're looking at the taxi industry of around 250,000 to 300,000 taxis on the road in South Africa, and that makes up a huge amount of, transport in South Africa. But if your taxi owners or your taxi operators are paying more for the price of fuel, then it does mean that at some point those prices are going to be rising in line with what's going on. Obviously, to stay competitive, people will try and absorb the prices as much as possible. But, like anything else, those prices go up. And in addition to, those transport costs, because right now we've sort of kept, in the realm of transport. Transport is also not only moving around people, it's also moving around goods. And there's a little bit of a lag that happens in the economy, but especially where you have sustained increases like this, it's only, so long that businesses can continue to absorb because, whether it's bread, milk, or anything that a person is buying in terms of food or any consumer goods that people are buying at the store, all of that has to be transported. And, some of them are very nominal. When you think about an overall cost, but where, you think about things like your food and all of that stuff, if you do have those sustained increases, some of those then get passed on to the consumer. And, that's largely been part of the reason why we've seen, the inflationary pressures that we have over the last couple of years. So it is a tough state to be in. Public transport, not in the best, situation, even for those that are, using some of the, I'm going to call it a hybrid option, such as ride sharing, the Ubers, the Bolts of this world. Even those, have also been, pushing up some of their prices. So once again, the consumer pressure, theme, does seem to continue for South African consumers.
What else can motorists do to try and, save costs? Because if we're looking at pouring a full tank in a 50-litre tank, for instance, that's about 1,256 rands. Now, I don't know how long a full tank lasts the average South African, but I'm assuming it can't be too long. And if you're spending on average 1.3 for your full tank and you perhaps need a full tank once every fortnight or once every week, that's quite a bit of money. So what are the other ways? I like the hybrid approach that you mentioned as well, but of course it does also entail that public transport system, which also needs a lot of work. But other tips and tricks that you may have for us?
Well, this one, it's apart from the ones that I mentioned earlier on, if you are a motorist, we talk about, taking less trips. There's also the factor where some of the people that are driving, some of the vehicles, there might be a substitution from, let's say, your 95 to 93 petrol. That's one of the ways that, some people, may go about saving a little bit of cost. Because in a lot of engines it's interoperable, though 95 is considered to be a higher quality, petrol. That's one. Some of the other tips that are coming out is for people to, plan their routes, a bit better. So if you're going to work, for example, what is the most efficient route for you to get to work, to school, to church, all of the places that you need to go. Obviously, that's I'm going to use a term that's used a lot by the youth, admin. It's a lot of admin to go out and, plan some of these things, but it may help you because in the time that you spend taking a longer route, you are burning more fuel and, that ends up costing you more money. So being a little bit more efficient with how you plan your travel, either in city or some of the longer journeys, that's one of the ways. Interestingly enough, one of the other tips that people talk about is defensive driving, because, that keeps you, being mindful about the road, about different conditions and, how you should operate out there. slower, be driving a little bit slower on the roads, not accelerating as fast. All of these factors, long term, it's not something you're going to feel in the immediate, to say, today I drove 20 kilometers, slower than I normally do, k's an hour slower than I normally do. You're not going to feel it immediately, but over time, those are some of the things that come in. But, maybe some of these things might also be interesting in terms of raising some of the other debates, in the market. Like right now, some people would have thought of if you were in a developed country, where they've been pushing the use of electric and hybrid vehicles. Some of the impacts, of these fuel prices become a little bit less, and what you're contending with more is the price of electricity as opposed to the price of oil. So, maybe these are some of the things, unfortunately, for South African motorists. The rate at which electric car adoption has been coming up locally, hasn't gotten to a level where it's sustainable and for the masses. And also the price of electric vehicles themselves is still quite prohibitively, high. So some of the ways in which you could save money in other parts of the world, including the public transport factor that we're talking about earlier on, unfortunately don't apply, in the local market. Also, yes.
I mean, the electric cars would be a great initiative as well. Sorry to cut you in there, Mudiwa, but when I think about, the load shedding crisis that we're dealing with, I think perhaps that should be sorted out first before we even look into these electric vehicles. And again, then still being left with this problem of fuel increases anyway. It just seems like a domino effect also when we think about the food cost, the cost of living for people as well. And then, of course, factoring in all these other things as well. Just before I let you go, when it comes to other parts of the world that you're mentioning and these tips as well, drive slower, defensive driving, these are all good and well, and I'm sure a lot of us will take those tips. But can we ever hope for news that says, coming out of the Central Energy Fund, a drastic decrease in petrol price or fuel prices?
I'll answer that. I think there's two factors that we need to, consider. The first one that I wanted to touch on is that, this fuel price issue is not only affecting, us in terms of our transportation. I mentioned earlier on that transport businesses have to do that, but the load shedding factor that you mentioned just now, over the last maybe year or two, a lot more businesses and homes have had to, start using things like your generators, to power their homes in times of, load shedding or power cuts. And, if you have increased fuel prices, that feeds into your price of powering your home, as well. So definitely something to consider. On the last part, that you mentioned around, the outlook, we need to hope that the oil-producing countries in the world decide to put a little bit more oil onto the market, because right now they have taken a decision to, the OPEC countries have taken a decision to restrict some of the supply. And that's part of the reason why we are seeing some of the supply pressures that are going on right now. And the rationale, part of it is what happened during and sort of just after COVID, because there was a period in which there was too much, supply on the market, and then the prices came down quite a bit, and the oil-producing countries didn't fare very well. People might remember what happened with the price of oil. It came down like a lot. To very low levels. And I think the oil-producing countries are trying to save themselves from an oversupply in the market. So we do hope that they're going to, release or at least increase some of the supply, because as the economy is recovering from, those COVID years, there is that increased demand. So they will hopefully have to take that decision and increase the supply and help us, because it's not only happening in South Africa, it's happening around the world.
Mudiwa, certainly we do hope that they do get better. Hope is indeed all we can have.